civilizations, we now turn to an enchanting, fascinating novel that explores a woman's resilience against the backdrop of India's freedom movement. Beautifully written by Ambassador Lakshmi M. Puri, Swallowing the Sun, it's a powerful story woven with resilience, hope, and transformation, and has been described as an epic feat of storytelling. A national bestseller, Ambassador Puri's debut fiction novel received tremendous appreciation from readers and has been touted as one of the most powerful and memorable novels of the 21st century. She's also been honored with the Delhi Literature Festival Award 2025 in the fiction category for her debut novel. So ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Ambassador Lakshmi Puri, an Indian Foreign Service diplomat for 28 years. She served in leadership positions at the United Nations for 15 years, and most recently as its Assistant Secretary General as well. She was a leader in the first global organization to promote gender equality, UN Women, for 7 foundational years. She's the recipient of the Eleanor Roosevelt Award for Human Rights, among others. So ma'am, thank you very much for your presence as well. And joining her on stage for a conversation is very well-known journalist, prime-time TV personality, he needs no introduction, Mr. Rahul Shivshankar, consulting editor, CNN News 18. Please give them a huge round of applause. Thank you very much, and the stage belongs to you, Mr. Shivshankar.
Can everyone hear us? Good afternoon. Have you all had your lunch? Need to be a little alert for this because this is going to be a fascinating conversation. I'm in conversation, as we all know, with Lakshmi Puri. The book, Ms. Puri, is an odyssey of awakenings, and I'm not exaggerating here, of Homeric proportions, with the relatability of Elena Ferrante's My Brilliant Friend. I'm sure a lot of you here have come across that book. And it also had 2 female characters, just as Swallowing the Sun. So congratulations
Thank you.
to you for this
so
masterpiece. And no wonder, after reading it, I was up 2 nights. I'm blaming you for my dark circles. 2 nights till 2 in the morning. Passing through this absolutely wonderful book, and no wonder it's won this award and others. So congratulations. Now, I have to begin by asking you this. Usually authors are influenced by other authors. You know, Salman Rushdie says Anton Chekhov and Joseph Conrad were his absolute favorites. Mm-hmm. But you seem to have been influenced by the authors of 148 love letters. So tell us a little bit about that.
That's wonderfully put. Of course, I have been influenced by all the great authors, both Indian and British. And of course, the great Russian authors as well. Tolstoy, the Bronte sisters, Jane Austen, all of that, but also Kamala Das and others, Virginia Woolf. So, but apart from all these, of course, the inspiration has come from home, from my parents, particularly my father, but also my mother, who were extraordinary people. You know, A.K. Ramanujan says that not all who are prophets who walk on water. But I would say that they were nothing short of prophets in their own right. So I wanted to write about people like them in that extraordinary generation, which was, this generation from 1918 to 1950, when India was under British rule. And there were these Western educated young people. They were hungrily imbibing Western liberal ideas and using them to confront their oppressors. And at the same time, they were awakening. You talked about many awakenings. They were awakening to their own civilizational greatness and strengths. And then there was a time of great cultural renaissance happening in vernacular literature, in Marathi literature, just as in Bengal and other parts of the country. But Maharashtra was experiencing this burst of cultural efflorescence. So all of those, trends meant, or all those forces, provided the sole force for the freedom movement and young people's engagement in the freedom movement. So this is it's a novel about young people of that time, and young people who were overcoming self-doubt, who were trying to throw off the yoke of slavery, fight against racial discrimination, and assert their identity, regain, build confidence, and reimagine themselves, reimagine their society, and reimagine the idea of India, carve it out of this inchoate idea, because civilizational idea, if you will, of Bharatvarsh. So that generation is what really inspired me. And also the stories that I heard from my parents, I was born to them when they were 45. So in many ways, I lived in their generation more than in my own generation. And I was fascinated by it. I inhabited that world. And I have been wanting to write this for decades. So that's where it all came. And I also very much drew upon not only memory, epiphanies, of course, that came to me as I wrote, but I also drew upon these wonderful love letters that I discovered as I was leaving for Budapest in a tin trunk. And these were letters mostly from my father to my mother.
Did they make you blush?
No, I knew that they were like that.
Right.
Meaning my father was a romantic.
Right.
And he was very expressive, demonstrative, sensitive. My mother was tough, sometimes abrupt, hid her feelings sometimes. So, I found most of the letters were from my father. And the few that I found of my mother were very dry, very matter of fact. So, but his letters were a source, gave me an insight into that period, into the emotions, into how young people related to each other, not only as man and woman would, but even as friends, as as scholars in a university, as young men. Like he talks in many of his letters, he talks about his angst when he's looking for a job and he's not getting a job. So many things of that time. He talks about the depression, which was in the 1930s, yes, which was hitting the world, but also India. So all of this is very much expressed in those letters. So I have mined them, definitely. And, but for David, it may well have turned into an epistolarian novel.
Yeah.
But I plan to, I hope someday, have it as a separate novel, like Tumhari Amrita type of novel.
Has Mr. Puri become more fervent in writing letters to you after that? Has he been inspired or?
No, we also belong. And one of the things that I must, say from, if you don't mind, I'll read something from here about the importance of letters. Yeah. I'm myself a believer in letters. And I feel it is the most beautiful way of conveying your feelings. It's also, something very different from writing WhatsApp messages or email messages where you instantly just send off something. This is very considered. You meditate on what you're going to write, what you're going to say. Some deepest emotions get expressed. Sometimes when you're very angry, you hold back, So it's also relationship building, remote relationship building, you will see from the letters. But one very, I would say, evocative letter, which I would like to. So, the importance of letters. Malti felt that she could never be alone when her long-distance lover, Guru, constantly embraced and pushed away, praised and berated, cajoled and mocked her through his letters. They were prolific and poetic, beguiling and eloquent, an endless source of inspiration and validation to Malti. His fountain pen traced lyrical word patterns. His fluid handwriting breathed life and voice, feeling and fragrance, color and movement into mere inanimate sheets of paper. And then this is the beginning of this remote relationship, because she has sacrificed her legal studies 100 years ago. Sacrificed her legal studies. She's a brilliant law student. She sacrifices her law studies to go to Banaras to teach at the Mahila Mahavidyalaya, which has just opened. And so she's starting off all on her own. And his letters, therefore, are a great source. A single woman at that time going all out on her own. And she's supporting him because he has rebelled against his father, not wanting to marry someone he wants him to marry. So this is that relationship building up. So he complains about, so there is so much about letters. So he says, Malti did not always live up to his expectations of, replying to his letters, etc. But then which goddess ever lived up to the expectations of her devotee, she argued. They had their lovers' quarrels through letters and about the letters and about waiting. So this is something about waiting. I do my usual pilgrimage to the letterbox and feel crestfallen when your letters do not arrive. I see this as a punishment for my coldness and formality, perhaps, for I deserve no better than death, cold silence. It is such a horrid torture to wait for a letter that never arrives, or which sluggishly arrives the next morning, if at all. A troubled day, a sleepless night, an anxious heart, and an ailing body. That is all my gain, dear Malti. How can you be so superbly careless, Malti, when I'm so punctiliously careful? So this is, the series of these letters. But they, of course, come towards the end. But it's their life story and experiences that this book captures. It's not a biography, I want to clarify. It's fiction,
yes,
but it's very much inspired by them and that generation of young people.
Let me ask you, because there are a few quotes which I want to actually bring up for discussion. The first one, the ant flies into the sky, she swallows the sun. That's the whole quote. It's actually the beginning of a poem, I think. Swallowing the sun now seems to symbolize some sort of a wistful journey of profound awakenings. So how does it reflect the theme of your book? This very evocative title. Actually, it's a beautiful title when you really begin to conceive it. The title also appears to be a metaphor for the audacity of hope displayed by our national heroes. Would you agree?
Yes. So this is, the title is drawn from Muktabai, Saint Muktabai, a teenage saint 13th century saint of Maharashtra, Muktabai. She wrote only 41 verses, died when she was just 18. But she was very spiritually evolved and worshipped even today as Chandi Devi and Adi Devi, and there are temples to her. So this verse of hers had always, very inspired me, because this verse, this Abhang, talks about miracles being possible, provided you have faith, provided you dare, provided you persist. And as you very beautifully put it, audacity of hope. But hope that you are sure you can, really realize. So the Abhang goes like this. Mungi udali akashi, tine gille suryashi, thor navlav zhala, vaz putra prasavla, vinsu patala si zai, शेष माथा बंदी पाए माशी व्याली घार झाली देखूनी मुक्ताई हंसली. So the ant flies into the sky. She swallows the sun. Another miracle, a barren woman gives birth to a son. The scorpion burrows down to the nether realms. The snake king Shesha bows down at its feet. The housefly begets a hawk. Muktabai sees all, Muktabai laughs. So the characters in this novel, whether they are women, but mostly women, they are boundary breaking. They are the ones who dare to achieve the impossible. What seems impossible. And I want to make that distinction. Not everything that seems impossible is actually impossible. So that's the hope, that margin of hope we try to break through. So these women, whether you are talking about Malti and Kamla,
I'm going to come to that, but
all of these women.
The
now,
book sings.
The national characters that you talked about.
Yeah.
So there are two passages that are really very evocative of this, how it applies to the characters. There is this, there is a chapter called, and this runs through all the other themes, like metamorphosis. Can you metamorphose from who you are, the ordinary, to become someone extraordinary? Then the theme of destiny versus free will, that is also very much part of this. To what extent, it is predestined that we should be someone or not. Then the third aspect is also how you can break boundaries and grow out of your limitations. So all of that. So there is this passage, if I will read, where Malti is thinking about what transformation she has experienced, and she's seeing around her. And there is also this audacity of hope that our national leaders, to your point, national leaders at that time, can you imagine that in the 1920s and even 30s, could we have imagined that we will be a free country in 1947? So it was an audacity of hope, and it was a leap, like, an ant swallowing, rising, soaring into the sky, and swallowing the leap of faith. Yeah. So Malti and Kamla had come to believe that they were living in Bombay at a time when everything was being turned inside out and upside down, the improbable Muktabai way. It was as if the small, sweet Elchi bananas grew with their ivory-colored, fragrant, sweet, pulpy flesh outside enveloping their thin yellow blotchy skin inside. It was as if the Indian tiger had come out of the forest and sat supping with brown coolies at the starched linen-covered table in the Gymkhana Club of Bombay, being served by British sahibs in red and white uniforms, doubling over to please the natives. It was as if the frail Indian ascetic, with nothing but the sword of his soul force, the shield of his khadi loincloth, and the cannon fire of the Indian masses, was breaching the iron and stone battlements of the great British Empire, riding on the waves of his tremulous voice. They cherished their freedom to become part of this miracle making, even if, as a tiny particle, they did not want to lose that privilege.
Absolutely lovely, and it really weaves so much in that, just that one, we all,
Yes.
when we go abroad, some of us, if you traveled about 20 years back, I'm 50, so it took me, I'm going back now 30 years in dating myself, but when a white man opened the door for you, you were like, what is that? What's happening? This is not real. Anyhow. Look, obviously it took a long time writing this, because I've sort of read your interviews, and you mentioned this story itself, fascinating. It's, as I said, it's a saga. Some say the book sings, so I'm expecting you to sing a little bit for us. Talk us through the stages, from your writing desk in Hungary to...
Right. So, yes, this, as I said, this was, this untold story, this story that was so unique and powerful, was wanting to be told for decades. And I only started writing it in Budapest when I was ambassador there. And I wrote 100 pages, and then I got a writer's block, or whatever it is called, and life took over, family, profession, everything. And then it remained like that until I returned, after being 18 years outside India, when I returned in 2018. And then in 2020, COVID came. And that was a moment of reckoning, because it was now or never. We got up those days thinking, looking at the oximeter, whether we'll be alive the next day or not. So I said, no, this is my life's project, and I have to write it, And the day I finished, I wrote it in 1 year, 270,000 words, and then when I finished, I told my husband, now I can die. So it was that kind of, cloudburst of expression which had been pent up within me.
So all that poetry
So
was
the
also
poetry.
written, it was all together.
So, poetry. My parents were very poetic people, but particularly my father, Ranjit Hoskote says, talks about poets, and he says they are married to bird song, and he was someone like that. So he would sing to us every evening a poem from a poetry book which he dedicated to me in 1983. I wish I had brought it today to show to you, in his own handwriting, and some of that is on the front page, Bal Kavi's poem. So Marathi poetry, Sanskrit poetry, from Kalidas in particular, and English poetry, it's threaded into this novel, woven into its tapestry, as seamlessly as I could. But it had to be that, because that generation, the first publisher I sent my draft to said, but people don't speak like this. They don't speak so poetically. So I said, you should have met my parents and people of that generation. They were very literate, literary, And they would spout poetry with
I'm
in their
surprised
dialogue.
that should have been said, because so many
I
of those
know,
people would
I know.
even recite
Exactly.
Urdu couplets or
Yes.
limericks or what have you.
Exactly. So anyway, so that's how it happened. So I have used poetry to, bring some strange situations to highlight. For example, Malti in her Sanskrit class in college is very embarrassed when she has to read from Meghdootam some slightly erotic verse, or when, of course, love, expression of love, when Guru first declares his love for her, so that poetry is also evoked, and that is the Bal Kavi's Prem Lake. Then there is patriotic poetry that has been evoked, whether it is Veer Savarkar's or it is Madhav Julian's or Yashwant's. So there is poetry at every occasion. So let me recite. And then there is a poem that Guru himself, Guru is the male protagonist, who is Malti's friend and classmate to begin with, and then her lover, and then husband. So he dedicates a poem to her, which also indicates, by the way, how, our culture is about, and we are going to talk about that, how our culture is so much about deification of women and girls. So let me begin with Guru's poem, which I have composed. And he says, Madhumalti, you are the goddess, installed in my temple's sanctum sanctorum. To the exhilarating heartbeats of celestial drums, my fevered chanting and joyous limpid songs. You accept me as your devotee, and I pledge my whole life to you, my dreams, dreamt and undreamt, for you to see and turn into miracles. Then he goes on to say, I aspire to reach yonder distant horizons, untrammeled, and swing back to my cove where calm inner rivers of happiness flow, meander, and rest. I will in turn shield you from non-believers in your divinity. And then he ends this by saying, O Madhumalti, let the beguiling veil of Maya once and for all be pierced and fall. Between the manifest and the truth, between the striving and the attainment, between the worshipper and the worshipped, between me and you. Now, there are two poems, and I don't know which one to recite. There is a poem where he first proposes to her. He writes this poem of Prem Lake, the ode to the evening goddess who writes the love letter. And then there is one where on their nuptial night, he recites, and which is about love unfulfilled.
Yeah.
The pond eager to meet the ocean. So Malti says, why are you singing this, or why are you reciting it at this point? And he says, just to remind us that it may not have happened.
Yes.
And to cherish this moment. So I don't know which one, but let me take a pick. एकत्र गुंफून जीवित धागे प्रीतीचे नर्तन नाचलो मागे एकता उभा मी येथे भोवती शोधी प्रियते होऊन मग्न त्या क्षणी धावती येती साजणी देशील नमग कसून खेव बांधतील वर तोरण देव बाजत जंगल मंगल गान कड्यातून खाली लोटून प्राण होऊनी काशाय रंग प्रेमाने बेहोश दंग पाऊगे समाधी सागरियन अजून संपेना वैसाख हंत.
Beautiful. I can well imagine how this can be turned into now a Netflix series, if that is going to happen.
So, just 2 lines to tell you the meaning, but those who know Hindi and can understand a lot of the words that were used, but just to tell you the first 2 lines and the last 4. Pulsating with life intertwined, we together flowed, the gift of the dance of love once bestowed, a solitary pond, muddied and parched now I stand, searching for my beloved in this wasteland. And then he dreams of all the, the celebrations that will lead to their union, and then he comes to the last part where he says, while we like gods in heaven will festoon welcome arches along, while we like crazed minstrels sing an auspicious song, amazed and rendered unconscious by love newborn, the saffron color of passion we must don. Throwing ourselves down from the edge to surrender our life force we earnestly pledge, then we will finally attain our union with the ocean supreme. But alas, ending the cursed season of Vaisak remains but a dream.
Now, on a slightly darker note, on a darker note,
Okay.
There's a quote, and this really did speak to me. And I think this sort of sums up quite a bit of the book in itself and this awakening. The quote is where Malti is looking at Ai, and she says, "Why did she suffer pain but had to stifle her scream?" This is a moving quote which holds the key to Malti's own view of women and their place. Now, can you elaborate on this? It is almost like silence is the first thing taught to women, and yet women like Malti found their voice in the dark. This is an ongoing battle which is, continuously played out between genders. Is this the central message from your book?
Well, certainly the central message of my book is about women's empowerment and and of gender equality. So the journey of Malti is that of empowerment, the journey of empowerment. But of course, it has to be traced against the background of where she was or where she began. And the mother is always the first person who is either your role model or someone whom you see as, or someone who is not your role model and you want to break away from that mold. So I remember this scene is very much etched in my mind because my mother used to tell me about her mother.
Who was called?
Ai, who is Ai, of course, and how she was very young when she was married, 10, 12 years old. And so this is actually, this Cri de Coeur is against child marriage, child motherhood, and putting the burden on women in the name of Vansha Vruddhi, and controlling their bodies, and they're accepting it as something that is their dharma. And there also this, that women must suffer in silence, that they must not express. So Ai is that traditional earth mother figure in this, and some of the most moving passages, including about her death.
But she's-
Our favorite passages, you know, there was a friend of mine who, I mean, he was so moved. He said when he read that passage about her death and how the little girls
Yeah.
realized that she is dead, that he said he cried, you know.
Yeah, I mean,
so-
I think
Yeah.
even in my case, when
Yeah.
I was 7 or 8 years
Yeah.
old when my grandfather passed away, and I didn't
Yeah.
even know that
Yes.
there was a lifeless body.
Yes.
So it's beautifully put. I
Yes.
must say that was a
Yes.
fantastic, moving
Yes.
part of the book.
Yes.
But tell us more about Ai, who is a fascinating bundle. I know we should be talking about Malti a lot, but Ai is somebody I think you can't
Yes.
take your eye off.
Yes.
Excuse the bad pun.
Yes.
But she's a bundle of contradictions. She's a fountain of superstitions, earthy wisdom, shrinking individualist, and the herald of rhyme,
Yes.
as we know.
Yes.
How much of Ai do you recognize in women around you? And her passing is also a cliche, actually. A woman can please, but not without sacrificing something. So she can't be both mother and, you know, the rearer of a child. It's funny in that sense. This is a recurring theme even today. You have to sacrifice something, your job to bring up your kid, or your life to bring up, you know.
Yes, so the
husband?
evolution, yes. So the evolution in terms of women's empowerment is that you don't have to, that others have to take on their share of what should be done in any situation, whether it's in the family. And by the way, I also want to say that I is the, you know, the complementary, as Malti says when they go to, or Shaila, her classmate at the orphanage come ashram where they go to study, she says to her about, she talks about the Prakriti and the Purusha elements. So she is in many ways the Prakriti and he is the Purusha, but a very empathetic, compassionate, sensitive Purusha with a hard exterior but very caring, and he's devastated by his wife's death, Ai's death, and he never marries again. And he sends away his daughters to an orphanage school rather than, and as a tribute to his wife, he decides that they will never be married as children, that there will be no child marriage, that they will be educated, and he is a follower of Maharshi Karve. And he then decides that education is the biggest enabler of their transformation and their being equal to men in every field. Their being able to do anything they want, be anyone they want. That's the kind of spirit he instills in them.
Your portrayal of caste, because I really want to get into
Yes.
that, is unflinching. It's also gritty, like Rohinton Mistri's In the Fine Balance. Now, was it difficult to weave in the trauma of caste violence while keeping the story centered on Malti's agency? I think this is something that we should talk about. And the novel shows caste is subtler exclusions. You know, you have educational
Yes.
access,
Yes.
all the things we're dealing with actually.
Yes.
Social
Yes.
standing, dignity.
Yes.
How did you choose to represent these lived hierarchies in this world you've created in this book?
So I haven't dealt so much with caste violence as the latter, what you talked about, exclusions of other kinds. And in particular, I deal with how my characters experience caste divisions or discriminations. And in particular, Malti and Guru, when they decide that they are going to get married, he is a Brahmin, Saraswat Brahmin, and she is a Maratha. And the objection is raised by the father, also the divide and rule based on caste divisions. So this is one of the observations. She says, Malti says, with all her respect for Hinduism, It was this caste fetish Malti could not accept or condone. She agreed with Veer Savarkar, and yet it seemed as difficult as peeling off the skin itself.
Absolutely, and it's interesting that you have also brought in Veer Savarkar being a Marathi. You realize that a lot that has been said about him is perhaps also not quite accurate. Now, this is where I want to get into this reclaiming of erased narratives. Now, how does Swallowing the Sun do this? You resist both colonial romanticism and nationalist nostalgia, and this comes through when at one time Maltese suitors face off about serving the British, the ICS,
Yes.
that whole thing.
Yes.
Was this balance important to maintain historical integrity? Because you say at that time, Malti says that, look, we've got to take the best from both.
Yes.
We can't, just sort of brush aside
Yes.
one,
Yes.
trying to sort of, preserve
Yes.
or
Yes.
exalt
Yes.
another. So how does this come through?
So I've tried to look at history and that period through the eyes of young Indians of that time. The lens is very much that of these young people. As I mentioned right at the beginning about their being a Western, educated, and yet very proud Indian identity being cultivated within themselves and overcoming self-doubt. So it is from that lens that I have tried to look at the events and their engagement with the making of history. So if I will look at how they engaged with the freedom movement. If you look at Guru and Malti, they begin with the theater of resistance, staging a play by Mama Varerkar, one of the revolutionary writers, playwrights of that time. And they play these very idealistic young, one is a young lawyer, the other is this feminist, early feminist Nandini, and how they then become lovers. But most importantly, it's a very strong nationalist statement. And in Marathi, the first play held at Elphinstone College. And then that leads to Satyagraha cells being formed as a follow-up. And then their engagement in the Simon Commission protests, their classmate is Yusuf Meher Ali, and then I think the swallowing the sun moment for Malti comes when later she finishes her legal studies and she wins a major trial of a revolutionary who happens to be her landlord, Mohan Kaka, and who had engaged in armed resistance. But it's a path-breaking trial and precedent-setting one. So there is this whole trajectory of how they engage, how they see the British Raj, how they see other people who are engaged in freedom struggle. Also the contestations between Veer Savarkar, Hindutva, Hindu Mahasabha, also the armed, the Anushilhan Samiti and the armed revolution versus Mahatma Gandhi's peaceful resistance and non-cooperation movement, all of that. And then there is this element I think you mentioned when we were talking earlier, that there is this element of to what extent women were engaged in this freedom movement. And that, along with the other unsung heroes, without whom the Mahatma Gandhis and the Madan Mohan Malviyas and the Annie Besants would not have achieved what they did. So I wanted to bring out that aspect of women's contribution to the freedom movement. And and that is something that is really also about, being, as you said, not romantic, but
you're not romanticizing
romanticizing any aspect,
Yeah.
but bringing it out in all its nobility at the same time. And also as a example to our young people today, because we are also aiming at another 47,
That's right.
2047.
Yeah.
And young people's role going forward is going to be as seminal as was that of young people leading up to 1947.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. I mean,
So-
this is the whole thing. And look, as you're now beginning to get a sense, it is a very multi-layered book. And it takes you to pretty much every part of the country, doesn't it? And so does the book, actually. It has traveled to different parts of the country. And you've got a huge reception there, and it has struck a chord. So how does it strike a chord with so many different, I mean, from the Northeast down to the South? How does a book that is actually centered around characters from Maharashtra, let's be honest, evoke such a response?
Well, first of all, as I said, it is, the themes are universal. Also very rooted and pan-Indian in that sense. So it's very authentic and Indian, but also with universal themes. So I've found that even non-Indians have warmed to it very spontaneously. And it's intergenerational. To use, someone said that it is tense without time. You know, it's timeless. So even though it is a historical fiction, it is contemporary. It is, as you said in the beginning, very relatable to the readers.
Yeah.
And I've found that not only women, but also men have loved it, and young people have loved it, as well as the older generation who can relate to their fathers and grandfathers having participated in the freedom movement, and it is a tribute to our ancestors, you know.
No, I think it is a book that speaks to men also. And I think that it should not be sort of only seen as a book, usually men sort of don't like to read about, they like to read about other men. Let's
Yes.
just put it that way.
Absolutely.
But this
Because
cuts
my
through.
men characters
Yeah.
are sterling examples
Yeah.
of how they need to be champions of gender equality.
Absolutely.
Because without that, and that's why people love Baba,
Yeah.
the father.
That's right.
They also empathize with men readers have empathized with Guru
Yeah.
and identified with him. So in many ways, it's a very modern take
Very contemporary.
on, and very
Yeah.
contemporary on something that happened 100 years ago, and more the wonder, isn't it?
Well, there are
And-
a lot of people who want to ask
Yeah,
questions.
yeah, sure.
So we're going to open the house, open the floor for 2 or 3 questions. Keep them brief so we can accommodate a lot more and we can hear a lot more from Ms. Lakshmi Puri. So who wants to ask a question? Please raise your hands and we can send the mic down to you. Yes? Dutch courage. Yes.
Ma'am, you wrote this book. What was in your mind and what were you really thinking when you thought that you want to write this book? And when did you start writing it? When did you think about writing the book?
As I said, it was always in my mind, in my consciousness. I think I would say around the time I joined Foreign Service, that was when I was 21. And, you know, when I went away from India, it made me very nostalgic about my past and about India's past. And I used to always think that I am going to someday write about my parents' story and that generation story, as I explained earlier. And I started writing in 2000. The first 100 pages, as I told you. And then I completed it in 2020. And it took another 2-3 years to get it published because I had to shorten it. Nobody wanted to read 270,000 words, although I said suitable boy was, double this size.
Yeah.
But they said that was 1993. People don't have that kind of attention span anymore. So I had to condense it to 150,000
Yeah,
words.
people want to read Twitter threads. Yes, the gentleman there. Yes.
Mr. Puri, you have got a very rich experience of diplomacy and UN. Why don't you write something on diplomatic aspect on UN or your diplomatic career?
So I have
So
written...
hang on.
Yeah.
This gentleman has picked on a question that I had for you.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the question is this, and I find that, these are fraught times where everyone is talking to each other, and usually the world of diplomacy is led by men, as you know, though they're not diplomatic at all. But women do bring a certain ability to build consensus naturally. Do, in your experience, women make for better diplomats than men? And then you can also take that question in.
So let me
Her
answer.
husband was one.
So let me take your question first, sir. Well, I am, this has been asked of me before, but I wanted to write this as something very personal, and I think what I had lost came back to claim me, these characters, this period, my country, so that came back to claim me. So I had to write this book as my debut novel. But yes, I'm going to be very much, I've written a lot on different subjects, non-fiction, in my career and during my career. And there's a lot on the net if you want to read. But I'm going to write fiction, a fiction book on UN stories.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Not entirely inspired by.
Yeah.
That would be fascinating.
So untold stories from the UN.
Okay,
So
this
that I'm
gentleman-
going to write. Now, to answer your question,
Yes.
I don't want to be gender insensitive on the other side, but I do think that women bring many, many qualities to diplomacy, including, as you said, more democratic decision making, the ability to
Take a step
understand
back.
the other side,
Yeah,
to
take a
step
step
back,
back.
less ego,
Yeah.
all of that I think is definitely there. And, I gave this C.B. Muthamma lecture, which is on YouTube on this very subject.
I must listen to it.
Yeah.
Gentleman there, yes.
Perhaps that's the reason why we see the ceasefires failing, because there are no women on the board. Anyways, my name is Shreyas and I'm a columnist. I didn't want to ask a despondent question, but it's just so
Where are
tempting.
you?
I'm here. Do you want me to
Sorry,
start?
sorry.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, so my question is, we discuss so many themes, the book is multi-layered, it deals with patriarchy. I'm so glad you invoked Savarkar and his views on dismantling the caste, opposite to what we see now, people kind of alluding to him when they refer to his views on casteism. But I just want to ask, when you see, and I think Rahul also mentioned it, that there's a continuity of the same issues, whether it's
Yes.
women issues,
Yes.
gender inequality, and the story. There's a difference of the discussion in book 100 years, and we are here. Your take on that? As a young person, it's appalling for me to even imagine that we still are discussing the same issues.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
That is sad. Yes, you're right.
No, whether it is on gender equality and women's empowerment, whether it is on the caste issue, whether it is this issue of divide and rule, and whether it is the issue of new imperialisms and new colonialisms. Many have, Upali Uparijita has said that in this, one of the strong aspects of the book she liked was that I'm returning the Western gaze.
Yeah.
And as Rushdie said, the empire writes back. So all of those issues are very much, issues that remain with us. Maybe the context has changed somewhat. We are in an independent country now, and the politics has changed around those issues. And it really sometimes pains me that we still are having to advocate once again on our achieving a casteless society, a society where men and women are equal, where women can find their best aspiration. But let me also say, it also shows us how much we have progressed as well. Those were outliers in many ways, that 100 years ago, what I show in terms of progress, and those were in many ways not the norm. That was something that was a path-breaking, episodic, anecdotal kind of example, but inspirational for today. So, as they say, on one hand, it is the more, the more it changes, the more it remains the same in one way. But also we have evolved so much. On gender equality, today, nobody, of course, there are still people who make these misogynist statements when there's violence against women, but it is politically and culturally incorrect today to say that. That mindset change has come about. Beti bachao, beti padhao, against child marriage, against female feticide. And then you also today have this women-led development concept, which is taking hold and is actually gaining traction on the ground, and women are experiencing the impact of it. So we have moved, we have come far, but we still must remember where we came from, and we must propel ourselves even faster towards 2047 Viksit Bharat.
So we're running out of time, I'm being told gently. Now there are hands, so I'm taking 2 more questions, that's it. Please keep them short. Has anyone got the mic right now? The lady here? Oh, okay, yes, the lady at the back, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello. First of all, it was an absolute delight to hear you, ma'am. My question is very simple. As somebody who is just starting out, what is that one piece of advice you would give to aspiring authors, especially how in your journey you talked about a reader's block or the creative fatigue. It might have occurred to you, and so would it happen to us. So what's that one piece of advice you would give to somebody starting out? Thank you.
Well, what I have learned is I shouldn't have stopped when I did. I should have persisted. Just put aside that hesitation and power on. Doesn't matter if you are not satisfied with what you have written, but just write. Let your ideas flow. Let the epiphanies come. Let the characters come and encounter you and accost you. Go through the different corridors of experiences and events that your mind is inventing. So go on. Don't stop. I really regret that I did not finish my novel when I should have.
And let me also say, because I wrote a non-fiction, and the thing is, you're never satisfied with the final product.
Exactly.
Even if you write an article and it gets published, people appreciate it, you go back and say, oh God, what did I write there? That one word, I could have changed that word. Why can't I change that word or that whole sentence? So, last question, please. Okay, madam here in the red. Oh, sorry, sorry, you did raise your hand. Yes, please. Ma'am, stand up, please, so you can get to the mic. Yes, ma'am, please stand up. Yeah, the lady, yeah, please stand up. Yes, that's right. She has been raising her hand for a while. Yes. No. The lady back there. So, yes, that lady, please. Yes.
कुछ पूछ नहीं रही हूँ मैम से मैम ने जो बेटियों के लिए विचार रखा उस पर मैं 4 लाइन बोलना चाह रही हूँ। बेटियाँ आजकल पढ़ने लगी हैं, बेटियाँ आजकल आगे बढ़ने लगी हैं, बेटियाँ आजकल कमाने लगी हैं, बेटियाँ आजकल माँ बाप का हाथ बटाने लगी हैं। क्यों और कैसे मैं बताती हूँ आपको, क्योंकि वो स्वयं के लिए स्वयं दहेज जुटाने लगी हैं। और आपने औरतों के बारे में बोला, उनकी पहचान या जल्दी शादी हो जाती है, उस पर मैं 2 लाइन तो बोलती हूँ कि माथे पे सिंदूर और माथे पे सिंदूर, कानों में झुमका, गले में मंगलसूत्र, पैरों में पायल, सब कुछ तो है मेरे पास, नहीं है तो बस मेरा नाम नहीं है मेरे पास.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, audience, for being here
Yeah.
this afternoon, this evening, early evening now. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you. May I
this
just-
beautiful book.
Thank you so much. I just want to say how special it is for me. I want to thank the Delhi Literature Festival for giving me this opportunity, for giving me the award. It means it's very special for me because I was born and brought up in Delhi. Although my parents came from Maharashtra and North Karnataka, but I'm through and through a Delhiite. And this literature festival is something that brings together, like Delhi itself, streams of creativity from all over India into a magnificent river of literature and culture. So thank you so much for that. And I want to end with, if I may, with a poem, an anthem, which Malti very much believes in, and it goes like this. मी ईश्वरांच्या जगत्कारणाच्या खरे हेतुची पूर्णता मंगळ बोला हवे ते मला काय त्याचे पुरे जाणतो मीच माझे बळ. So this basically means jauntily holding an elephant calf in one hand, in the other with a mewling lion cub I stand. The majestic tiger, half dead with fear, from his cave cautiously does peer. These mountains are mere rocks to deceive. The waves of the ocean are like trembling leaves. And then, am I not complete and auspicious? Am I not complete and auspicious? The purpose of God's creation felicitous. It matters not to me what is your opinion. I well know my own strength, my own dominion. So this is a message to all the young Indians here today, that you must know your own strength, your own dominion, and it matters not what the world says. We are going to get there. We are going to achieve our greatness.
Wow, what an enriching session.